Okay, everyone, welcome to the final session in our So You Want to Be an Azure Solutions Architect Expert series. This has been a mammoth series. This is our 6th session. So thanks to everyone for being involved in this one. It's been really great. And I will hand over to Dwayne to do the final session, all focused on labs and exam prep.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thanks everybody for joining, and those of you that have been joining for the past 6 weeks. Again, yes, we're going to cover today no specific topics necessarily around services, but we're going to talk around the what to expect in terms of the exam experience if you haven't taken a Microsoft exam, and what you might expect in terms of from a lab standpoint in terms of preparing and understanding the services, as well as to help you prepare for the exam. So if you're new to these sessions, my name is Dwayne Natwick. I'm a senior cloud training architect, Microsoft certified trainer, regional lead for the program, and I do have the Solution Architect Expert certification, along with many other certifications. So I have taken these exams. Last year, I took both of the exams and was lucky enough to pass them. So let's so as we go through, we're going to go through a few of these items depending on time, but we'll talk through it all. I did put out another blog post on my blog a couple days ago that went through and provided some additional information to accompany this session as well. So if you want to get some more information after this session, feel free to join that as well as Hugo puts the PowerPoint show on his on the Cloud Lunch and Learn GitHub for with the slides that I am presenting as well. So feel free to join and grab all of that information. So as we've talked about for the last 6 weeks, we've been talking about all of the objectives for the exam, which are at these links down at the bottom of this slide. Keep in mind, we do have the AZ303 and AZ304 exams are currently in beta. They have been in beta for about a month now. The 300 and 301 exams are scheduled to retire on September 30th, and probably going to see about a month or so of the two exams probably coexisting, as they've done with the 103 and the 104 for the Azure Administrator. They both coexist right now in GA form. The one thing is, if you take the 303 or the 304 exam now, you will not get your results until probably 2 to 3 weeks after they've gone out of beta into GA. So if you want immediate results and immediate feedback on how you did on your exam, so you can move to the next exam, I would recommend taking the 300 or the 301 first and foremost. There's not a whole lot of difference between the two. You can, at these links, it actually compare the objectives, but the main thing is really what they did was they changed a lot of the structure of the exam and the order of how the objectives flow. So let's talk about exam preparation. And with the work from home orders that a lot of countries have, it's harder, obviously, to go to a testing facility potentially to take the exam, or you may not be comfortable with it in this particular time with COVID-19 being still being out there. But one of the things that Microsoft put into place almost a couple years ago now, but probably a year and a half or so ago, was home proctor exams, and that's the ability to take these exams from home, and it's available in most countries, from what I understand. And Some things around that to understand is this gives you the ability to take it in your home or in a conference room in your office, but what it does require is some key points here, which are located on the slide. Good best practices. The exams open 30 minutes before your scheduled time, so you can start your check-in any time, and usually the check-in doesn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes. And if you do start 30 minutes ahead of time, then you do get extra time. You do get to start your exam early. You don't get any extra time, but you still get to take your exam, start your exam as soon as your check-in process is over. Some key things to know is make sure all software and background applications are shut down or stopped within your task manager. That includes sometimes antivirus and anti-malware software will block the Pearson VUE software. So make sure that if you have to stop Windows Defender scans and things like that, or any antivirus. I've seen Symantec shut it down or block it, especially if you're using like a work laptop with a corporate policy on it. I tend to use a personal machine that I have administrative control over to utilize for test taking. Pearson and Microsoft looks like to have worked together recently though to put some parameters in there to avoid those things being blocked. So make sure you have a clean workspace. They will ask you to take pictures of your workspace prior to checking in to make sure that there's no papers, that potentially if you have a monitor, an external monitor, that it's unplugged and powered down, and that you have a working webcam and microphone on your laptop. You're not going to be you're generally going to be utilizing a laptop, or if you have a desktop that's just your single desktop with a single monitor, make sure you have a camera that has a microphone. Key thing is it has to be a quiet workspace as well. They are going to be watching you through the web camera and listening to you the entire time. Don't be covering your face, covering your mouth, particularly during the test, as they'll take you down. They'll contact you first and tell you, give you kind of a warning. But if it continues, they will shut your test off and cause you failure. So, there's some key things around that. Take the system test beforehand, and it'll allow you to test your system, and it'll boot up just a quick, are you seeing this test kind of thing within the Pearson VUE application. It'll step you through the check-in process to make sure that it's working and what you need to expect. So definitely recommended to do off the top. Do it immediately when you schedule. I generally tend to also try it the day before my exam as well, just to make sure there weren't any Windows security updates that are causing any additional problems. Next thing I want to talk about was the exam types, the question types. So generally there are 6 different types of questions that you're going to find in a Microsoft exam, especially the exams above the fundamentals exams. And the key things are, you're going to have your typical multiple choice and possibly true false type questions. But what you'll get a lot of is you'll get a few case study questions, and this is particularly relevant. There's more case study questions on the 301, 304 exam because it's a designing in Azure course. So it's not considered, a hands-on type exam. It is a be able to take a scenario and recommend a solution out of type exam. So you might get a few more case studies on that exam than you would on the first one. But you will generally on any Microsoft exam get get a couple case study exams at minimum, and those are it'll give you a fictional company, what they do, what their business problems are, what their technical issues are, and what their technical goals are going forward. And then you'll get anywhere between 4 to 8 questions on that particular scenario. They may give you some exhibits, so there'll be some tab. Make sure you check and make sure there's no additional tabs up at the top that say exhibits that are giving you more rundown on the environment and the situations and the configurations and things like that. But definitely get yourself familiar with what the case studies are. Best way to do that probably is to utilize the Measure Up, the official prep tests with Measure Up, through which are Pearson type tests, which give you a very similar exam experience. WizLabs is another one that does give you a pretty rich format of questions as well. I'm going to leave the scenario based for the as the last one. There's drag and drop order questions. If you are going through preparation through, say, Microsoft Learn or any other exam prep content for these exams, pay particular attention to slides that have a particular order to them, and understand that order. And when you're doing labs and doing hands-on to prepare, pay particular attention on certain things around what the order is. I'll give you an example, is Azure Site Recovery, understanding what the order is and what you have to do to deploy an Azure Site Recovery or a import-export job for migrating data. Understand those steps, because you might get a drag and drop type question where it gives you 6 choices on the left and it says put the steps in order, and you have to drag and drop those into place. One thing that Microsoft is very good about in their exams is if it's more than one choice, it's going to generally tell you in the question how many choices there are. That goes with the drag and drops as well as the multiple choice type questions. If there's more than one answer for it, it will tell you how many you need. So it'll say in the multiple choice questions, select the 3 ways to do this or the 2 ways to do this, and it won't let you step through unless you've picked that exact amount as well. So unlike some exams that you haven't taken in the past, that you may have taken in the past, that leave that wide open to for guesswork of I know there's more than one because it's a square instead of a circle to select. Microsoft at least tells you that, because that's always been an area of stress and frustration for me on an exam when they don't tell me how many it is. I pick 2 and they might have wanted 3, those type of things. The select it to fill in, I think I might have mentioned something about PowerShell code in a previous discussion, but about the only thing, and they don't make you know and understand code or create code in terms of having to type an entire line of CLI or PowerShell code, but you will have a situation where they'll give you tell you a scenario, which is generally most of the questions start with some sort of scenario, and tell you what the objectives are or the requirements are, and then give you code with some particular variables within that code not complete with and there's a drop down box for you to select. And that's really what you need to understand in terms of how PowerShell code is structured, or how CLI code is structured, to understand what commands and what variables you need to fill in what places to execute the requirements of the question. So those are important as well. There are what I call yes or no questions. They're almost very similar to a true false type question, where they're going to give you, again, a particular scenario, and then they're going to give you a list of questions or statements, and you're going to say whether they're correct or not. An example of that is a lot of times they'll give you an exhibit for virtual network or user type access, and you have to comprehend out of that exhibit who is able to access what, or give somebody what, assign privileges to another user and things like that. And it'll give you 3 statements about that. Like user 1 can give administrative rights to user 3. User 2 can give administrative rights to user 3. And you have to tell for each one of those whether that's correct or not. So those are the yes, no questions. And then the last one is what I just kind of call scenario-based questions. And these are probably the toughest questions that you'll run across on the Microsoft exam, where, and it'll tell you when you go into the section for this. Each of these generally hit a specific section. You'll have a section for your case studies. Generally, your drag and drop fill-ins, yes, no questions, and multiple choice all fall into that whole general test question category. And then we have these scenario-based questions. And when you enter that section, it's going to tell you that once you answer one of these questions, you cannot go back. And the reason for that is it's going to give you a particular situation. It's going to give a statement of what the solution may be. It's going to say, you do this. And then it's going to say, is this correct? And you need to know and need to say, you need to look at what the requirements are and what the solution is, and say, does that solution take care of all of those requirements? And then you select yes or no. You step forward, and it's going to give you the exact same requirements with a different solution. And then it's going to say, is this one correct? And you could get 3 straight statements that are exactly the same, but the solution is different. So it's really testing your knowledge and understanding at that point. It's probably the deepest knowledge test within the entire test, because you're getting 3 questions you're getting three questions with the same requirements, but 3 different solutions, and you need to know in your heart that, and in your mind, that this is the correct answer, because you may select, it may be partially correct, and then you go to the next one, you're like, oh no, that's the right one. Being that these are weighted exams, they're looking at all 3 of those and how you're answering. So you don't just go through and just say, well, one of these is correct, or 2 of the 3 of these are wrong, I'm going to just answer them all no. They're really testing your understanding there, and not knowing how and what level questions are weighted. I'm going to guess that those particular questions are probably pretty heavily weighted, because they're really testing your understanding of how you're going to solve a solution. So that's an important thing to understand around those. So those are what you're going to be looking at in terms of these, in terms of the exam questions. And I know I spent a lot of time on that, but I get a lot of questions around what are the questions like, what should I expect? So
What?
Somebody's off of mute. If you could put yourself on mute, please. So it's important to understand what these questions are. Like I said, find an exam prep engine, not an exam dump, please. But the Pearson Measure Up exam prep is usually pretty good, and it has all of these type of questions on it, and it gets you familiar with how the questions are asked going into the exam. It doesn't give you actual questions, but at least gives you an idea of what might be asked and how it's asked and how you go through it. So now let's get into, and I'll pause for a minute. I don't see any questions. I've seen some comments. I know Elio put the system test in the chat for everybody, so I appreciate appreciate that, Elio. That was what I was talking about doing that system test before doing your exam. I'll pause for a moment and see if anybody else has any questions around exam questions or preparing to take the exam before I get into labs.
Anybody got any questions? Can pop them in the chat or come off mute. No?
All right, we'll move on. Are we worried? Hopefully not, Mauricio. Nothing to be worried about. It's just a test. It's all right. I always have that moment of anxiety right before I hit the end button to just see what's waiting on what's going to pop up on my screen after I hit end, whether it's going to be a congratulations you passed or sorry, try again. So let's get into some of the lab preparation around things. And Microsoft has put labs into their exams so that they can test your particular knowledge of working in the Azure portal. Again, they don't ask you necessarily to run PowerShell code. There have been some questions, some tasks in the past that I've heard that have needed that. Particularly, there was one that needed you to be able to put a certain disk size on a server that before the disk size was allowed of that size. But that was really the only one I've ever seen that would have been a PowerShell code type. Most 99% of the tasks are executable within the Azure portal. So one of the things that you may or may not, what I tell everybody is be prepared for a lab or two in the exams. I believe Microsoft has pulled off of that with the pandemic because they're making sure that their resources are going towards production services rather than testing services. But don't be surprised if you have some sort of lab. And I've put some of the potential options that I've seen and heard in terms of what what topics they're around in a lot of cases for both of the exams. Like I said, 304 probably isn't going to have a lab because it is a design type course and type exam. It's architecting and designing. So what they're going to generally put in play here are a lot of case studies and a lot of the what do you do in order type questions that I was talking about before. And a lot of times they're particularly very heavy around Azure Migrate, Azure Site Recovery, and data migration type stuff. So like import, export, or AZ copy, and those type of things. Understanding the steps and practicing those steps will get you comfortable with what might be asked. Microsoft does provide open source labs that you can utilize in your own subscription and practice. And so those are out, like I said, on GitHub, and I've got let me find my, so if you go out on GitHub, you can go to directly to GitHub's / Microsoft Learning, and you can find the labs for all of the exams. You can see they do have the labs for in multiple languages for the 300s. So I just did a search on AZ-30 blank so that it pulled them all up. You can see you've got 300, 301, 303, and 304 right off the bat. These are all the English based. And if you select them, and I was looking at the 303 earlier today, and they have not migrated all of the lab files for all of the modules into 303. So my recommendation is to also look at the 300. And if you go into the instructions, it actually puts all of the lab instructions right in here. So, so if you want to know configuring virtual network peering, go in here and you can go right through these exercises and execute these steps and get yourself comfortable in the portal. The 304, for example, instructions, labs. Again, they haven't put them all in here yet. So again, you could go into 301 and find a lot of the labs, and you can see here, you have getting started with Resource Manager, building an IaaS environment. So all of those securing secrets, deploying Configuration Manager. You can see those all in here. And here, your lab list here for AD authentication, database-based applications, things like that. So you have a lot of those in there. Like I said, it's very important to get yourself familiar with the Azure Portal. We've gone through some demos as we've gone through a lot of these sessions. Some key things is understanding those key points. Particularly around virtual machines and networking, and understanding how to put those together. And those are very easy things to do. As you practice through here. Key points to know if you're not familiar with the Azure environment is best practice is create a resource group that's being used for your labs. And then once you're done practicing, make sure you're shutting down any virtual machines. Key point is your main cost within the Azure environment is going to be virtual machines that are running, databases that are running, if you boot up a firewall, and if you put anything in storage. I always, when I'm creating virtual machines for testing and for labs, turn off all of the diagnostics, because if you turn on diagnostics, it's going to create a storage account that's going to start pushing data and pushing log files into that storage account, and then you're going to incur a cost. So make sure you turn all that off unless you're looking to see how Azure Monitor works, which is a feasible option, but to make sure that you're incurring too many costs, or getting billed too much to your credit card when you're done doing your testing. And I generally try to do this after every day, is just delete the resource group. And what that's going to do is just delete everything that's within your resource group, and then you don't have to worry about any incurred costs. If you're going back, the next day, create a new resource group, create your resources in there. So it's a way that you can control your cost within the environment, and that way you don't have to concern. You can test in here. If you're testing for a day and you're setting up a virtual machine, it's going to cost you pennies. I have a virtual machine that I set up right before this. I used a B series virtual machine that runs about 2 cents an hour, I think, something like that. So it doesn't run a whole, it's not going to cost me a whole lot if I leave this up for a day. It's not going to, it's going to cost me a fast food lunch. So it's not going to be bad. Any of the other resources that I have in here, I don't have anything in storage, so it's not going to cost me any money.
Dwayne,
if you're not, yes.
There's a question in the chat. Just checking if you've seen it. It's, while attempting some Microsoft Learn modules, I'm required to create Azure resources in a lab. Will the Microsoft Learn module auto detect the creation of said Azure resources and mark the chapter section as complete?
Yes. Yes. If you're doing the Learn modules and they have, yes, some of the Learn modules, that's a great question because Microsoft has done a lot with their Microsoft Learn environment. So if you go into your your dashboard and you look up the exams and you go in and you run one of the courses in there, a lot of times there is a sandbox type of installation to run those tasks, and it does do a validation check that you went through those tasks before marking that particular section complete. So that's a really great question, and a way to do some lab work without building your own environment and testing it. So I appreciate that question because it is helpful to do that. If you want to get deeper and wider in terms of the Azure environment, then going through the GitHub labs those are the actual labs that are part of the actual Microsoft content course. So it's it is when I do a course on one of the Azure Solution Architect courses, those are the labs and the exercises that the students go through. So they're a lot deeper and wider than what you get in the Microsoft Learn. But Microsoft Learn's, I think I mentioned this, the first session is a great place to start and get a gauge on where you might lie in terms of preparing for the exam. So one of the key points around the exam is understanding, and we talked about this within a couple of the sessions, is understanding your virtual machine scale sets and how to configure those and what you need to configure those, virtual networks and peering of virtual networks. And those are things to understand pretty well within the Azure environment. So you might have a lab type task where you need to create a virtual machine scale set. So how do we do that? And the easiest way to do that is to find and search on scale sets and create the virtual machine scale set. You create the scale set in a different area than what you would for a single virtual machine. So that's important to understand. One of the nice things around if you do get into the lab environment that I've found is that it does not allow you to go completely off base. If you're in the completely wrong area, a lot of it's from a policy standpoint is going to be grayed out and not allow you to do it. So if you get to a point where you think you're doing something right and it doesn't let you execute it or create it, understand that you've probably done something wrong. You've probably gone astray in terms of what area you're in. So that is a little bit helpful rather than going completely off base. So, but if we wanted to create a scale set here and go in here, I'll just leave it as a Ubuntu server. I'll leave it with that. Just gonna create a quick username here. And go through. Key thing here, we're going to create networking. One of the things that you may be required to do is put a load balancer in place. So you can create a load balancer, which is a best practice. If you have a virtual machine scale set, you're generally going to want the traffic to be directed equally to all of those virtual machines. So it may ask you to create a load balancer. You can create a load balancer right within creating your virtual machine scale set. So you have that. Then we have our scaling, and it might give you directions on what you need to do to scale. So you go through that. Again, I'm going to turn off my boot diagnostics so that I don't get a storage account opened up. It may have you understand the monitoring the health. I'm not going to do that right now, but things to understand through the steps and what the steps are as we go through each of these. And it's going to a lot of times tell you what image, tell you what size, where it's not default, so that you have to select it and you have to go through it. So that, this is a typical type of task type question you might see in going through just those steps. Create a virtual machine scale set, set the scaling to a specific parameter, make sure it's a Windows Data Center 2019 on this type of virtual machine. Put the load balancer in, put it on, might have you select the network and put it on a specific network and those type of things. So going through those steps and taking those steps yourself to get you familiar with it is going to help you be more prepared for your exam. Another popular one that I've heard as well is in virtual networking. So if we go to our virtual networks, and I do have 2 virtual networks created right now, and what you might be asked is to create 2 virtual networks, and creating a virtual network is very easy. You click add, you put it in a resource group, and it's going to generally tell you what the resource group is. And make sure you put in your IP addressing. One of the things Microsoft does tend to do, if I try to put this in a 10.0, you can see it's going to tell you that I'm overlapping IP addresses. So, so one of the things, if you recall me talking about virtual networking, I don't know if I went deep into this, but to be able to peer to virtual networks, they cannot be on overlapping IP addresses within the Azure environment. So if you put in an IP address and you get this warning that it's overlapping, you want to make some adjustments. And generally, it's going to give you by default a IP address that is not overlapping. So you can keep it as a default, or assign it a different one if you wanted to create your own schema. But it's going to give you non-overlapping IP addresses in most cases. So keep that in mind. It might ask you to change the name here to say to a specific identifiable name than default. So you can very easily do that. So here now, my validation's passed. I'm going to create my virtual network, and then I can go in once this is created and go through these steps then to peer my virtual network. So if I go to my resource, now you can see the virtual network peerings, and I can add a virtual network peer. Choose my virtual network, and you can see that I have 2 virtual networks that can be peered. It's telling me I can't peer this one, but that's because that's the one I'm on, as you can see up here. If there were other overlapping ones, it's going to tell you which ones you can't do. I will use this one, and then you need to give that a name for one VNet. Up here, you're giving the name for the VNet you're in to the VNet you're peering to. Here, it's the VNet you're peering to the VNet you're in. Allow, and then here in terms of configuration, it might tell you, whether you want to forward traffic between the virtual networks, allow forwarded traffic. Both, this is forwarded traffic both ways. So keep attention to what the tasks are that you're being asked to do. It might ask you to allow traffic from one, from one to the other, but not in reverse. For dual traffic, it might just be one-way traffic, which then you'd have it disabled with one, enabled with the other. If they do have you create a gateway, then you would click this. I don't have a gateway within my environment, so it's going to fail out if I do click that button. And then now it's creating both peering setups on both sides, and in a moment it is actually going to show that I have a peering status and it is connected. So ta-da. And you can see I'm connected. If I go to this VNet here and go to peering, it's going to show that I'm connected. A year ago, you would actually have to go through this step twice to get it and then initiate the connection. The Azure Portal Azure's actually created more of an ability to do this much more intelligently, so that you just go through this in one configuration step. It deploys and peers the connection. So those are the main things around the labs to understand. The last thing that I did want to show is if we go to Azure Migrate in particular and go through a assessment. Here it actually, goes through what your tools are and what your migration is. So stepping through what these are and how to do those is important, and understanding what you're doing there. And the other one was that I wanted to talk about site recovery. And key thing around site recovery is you do need to have a recovery services vault before you can do Azure Backup or Azure Site Recovery. So it's important to have these in place. And this only takes a minute to create the recovery services vault as well. And here, if we get started on site recovery, it puts you through here in terms of what you need to do. And, the preparing of your infrastructure is what you're going to see a lot. If you're using an on-premise network, it's going to ask you on-premise to Azure. Are you performing a migration or not? What the virtual machines are in, and all of the steps then in these deployment guides. This deployment guide over here is what you're going to have to take into account. Same thing with, say, an import-export job. What do you have to go through, and what are the steps? That you need to take to create that job. So going through all these steps and stepping through this and understanding how that takes place is going to be important to just understanding some of those drag and drop type questions that you might get. So that's about it from a standpoint, next steps. I know I've shared out, and you can find this on the blog articles, the self-assessment tool that Build5Nines has out there on their website. It's very helpful to get an idea of how you stand on the objectives. So Microsoft Learn, we had the question around doing modules in Microsoft Learn. So definitely do those. Like I said, create an account and do those labs. Understand how the environment works is very important, especially if you're new to the environment. Doing that hands-on from my standpoint is very helpful, and stepping through those steps and just understanding what you need to do to get things set up is very helpful. And that brings us to the end of the training here. So, and this session. So I appreciate everybody's attendance in in these sessions. Wanted to give my last prizes for this exam as well. The winner of last week's quiz is Maurizio Pagano. So congratulations on that. So I'll be contacting you for to give you your prize, which is 2 months on the Skill Me Up platform, which will help you continue to prepare for your exam. And then my overall winner, instead of doing a quiz, since we don't have a session going next week, I decided that this one was going to go to the one person that was in every session, took every question, or took every quiz in all these sessions, and that's Rick Condon. So thank you very much, Rick, for attending every week and taking all of the exams. So I'll be contacting you as well for a 2-month subscription to Skill Me Up to help you prepare for your exams. And one of the nice things about Skill Me Up is Skill Me Up actually, if you go through and take the exams for the Azure Architect and take those learning paths, they have their own lab engine built in, so you don't have to set up a subscription. I work for Opsagility, who runs the Skill Me Up platform, and we put labs in place that step you through the tasks we were just talking about, and it's going to give you a very similar environment to what you might expect in terms of the exam. So thank you very much, everybody.
Amazing.
I'll turn it back over to Lisa.
Well done, guys. Well done. Yeah, so I'll just do the reminders on all the links. You'll see that I've posted them in the chat. Please take some time to provide feedback. We would love to learn what's working well, what could be done better. So yeah, let us know. Please register for the Microsoft Learn materials relevant to this session. That's the details that you see on screen now, but I've also put them in the chat too. And yep, you can get us on GitHub. We've shared a link to that. If you're not already following us on Twitter, please do. It really means a lot if you could do that and share us with your friends and your contacts who might be interested in some of the up and coming Cloud Lunch and Learn sessions. With that said, Hugo, do you would you like to stop recording now, or would you like to try out the new Teams features?
Well, I think we will not be able to test it today, so that's fine.
Okay.
We can test it on the next session.
Okay, cool. With that said, does anyone have any questions? Any final questions for Dwayne? No? Okay.
And everybody, feel free to follow me on social media and reach out. Want to know, if you take the exam and pass it, I'd love to hear about it and see your badges. Anytime anybody passes the exam, I feel we're just growing the Azure family. So want to share in your successes. So.
Yeah, amazing. I was going to say, if you don't have any questions for Dwayne now, you can definitely find him on all the socials and the blog. And yeah, definitely reach out. Okay, guys, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we hope you've enjoyed lunching and learning with us. See you later.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody.